The payments showed up on page 14 of the estate summary. 31 transfers, the same amount, the same account number, every month without exception. The name on the receiving end was Margaret Henley. Nobody in the Ware family had heard of her. When the attorney asked whether Thomas had ever mentioned that name, a friend, a former colleague, anyone, his son looked at her with the expression of a man searching for a memory that had never been given to him. He said, "My father didn't talk much about the past." Thomas Ware died on a Thursday in November, at 68, of a second heart attack that arrived 9 days after the first. He had been a project manager in commercial construction for most of his working life, 32 years across various sites in the Carolinas. Retired at 62, and spent his final years in a house outside Raleigh that his wife had chosen before she died of cancer in 2019. His estate was modest: a house with some equity, 2 retirement accounts, a life insurance policy naming his son as sole beneficiary, no outstanding debts, no foreign accounts, nothing structured to conceal anything. The family hired an estate attorney to close things out, the way families do when paperwork and grief are required to happen at the same time. The attorney's name was Carol Marsh. She had handled perhaps 50 estates by that point in her career and had developed a reliable system. She worked through the asset summary, the account statements, the insurance documents, the outstanding utility accounts. Most of it was exactly what it appeared to be. The payments to Margaret Henley were not 31 months, $1,200 each, the first dated September of the previous year, the last dated 2 weeks before Thomas died. Carol traced the receiving account to a joint checking account held by a Margaret J. Henley and a David A. Henley in Greensboro, North Carolina. Next to David Henley's name was a notation: deceased, 2015. She called Thomas's son. He had never heard the name. He asked his sisters. Neither of them had, either. Carol's first assumption was what most attorneys assume when they find unexplained recurring transfers from a deceased man to a woman his family doesn't recognize: an affair, or the financial arrangement that sometimes follows one. She had encountered it before. She knew how to present such information carefully and without editorial. But the picture didn't fit. The receiving account was a household checking account, the kind used for electricity and groceries, not for a second life. Each transfer from Thomas's side was labeled in the memo field with the same 2 words: utility assistance. There was no correspondence tied to the Henley account. No phone records connecting Thomas to any number at the Greensboro address. No visits anyone in the Ware family could place. Carol expanded her search. She requested 6 years of Thomas's bank records and found something she hadn't expected. The payments had not started 14 months ago. They had started in 2009. She had only been looking at a recent account. Thomas had made earlier transfers from an older account, closed when he consolidated his finances at retirement, going back to September of 2009. She printed the full history and spread the pages across her desk. 212 payments, $1,200 each, just over $250,000, across 15 years, to an account in a city Thomas Ware had no documented connection to, for a woman whose name his family had never heard him say. Carol sat with that for a long time. She found the obituary for David Henley. Died June 2015, at 51. A brief notice, the kind written by someone not thinking clearly at the time. Survived by his wife Margaret and his daughter Claire. Preceded in death by his parents. No cause given, no service details. She kept searching. A LinkedIn profile inactive since 2007, listing David as a heavy equipment operator. A local news item from July 2007 about an industrial accident at a commercial construction site in Greensboro. A worker had been critically injured. The article named the injured man as David Henley, 34 years old. It named the project manager on site as Thomas Ware. Carol read that sentence several times. She filed a public records request for the OSHA incident report. It arrived 11 days later. A suspended load failure during a shift change. The load swung unexpectedly and struck a worker descending the access ladder. David Henley sustained a spinal injury that left him partially paralyzed from the waist down. 11 weeks in the hospital. 3 subsequent surgeries. A long-term prognosis that made full recovery unlikely. The report cited a pre-movement safety checklist that had not been completed before the load was moved. Thomas Ware's signature was on the checklist from the previous shift. The report did not find him personally liable. The equipment operator who moved the load without clearance bore primary responsibility. Thomas had not been on site when it happened, but the pre-clearance verification, the safeguard designed to catch exactly this kind of hazard, had been signed off on Thomas's shift. OSHA fined the company. The company paid it and moved on. Thomas continued with the same firm for 4 more years before taking a position elsewhere. David Henley never worked again. Through other records, property taxes, utility filings, a tax lien from 2011 that was ultimately resolved, Carol assembled a rough picture of the Henley household during those years. The workers' compensation settlement had been calculated 6 weeks post-injury, before the full extent of David's long-term limitations was clear. It had been modest. It had not been enough. Carol thought about the 2 years between the accident and the first payment. She found no record of any contact between Thomas and the Henley family during that period, no civil suit, no dispute, no correspondence of any kind. Just silence, and then a first transfer in September 2009, labeled utility assistance, and then one every month after that without interruption for 15 years. It had continued through Thomas's wife's cancer diagnosis, through her death in 2019, through his retirement, his move, a first heart attack the previous spring that had hospitalized him for a week. Every month, without variation, she thought about what that kind of constancy required. Not just the money. $1,200 a month was not a small amount for a man on a retiree's income, but the ongoing private decision to continue. Not guilt acknowledged once and set aside, but guilt returned to and acted on, month after month, in silence, to someone who didn't know his name. She had handled 50 estates and never thought about one the way she thought about this. Most of her work was documentation, cataloging what existed and distributing it according to instructions. This was something else. This was the record of a private conversation between a man's conscience and another family's survival, conducted entirely in 2-word memo fields on a monthly bank statement. She called Margaret Henley. The phone rang 4 times. A woman answered with the careful voice of someone who has learned over time to be careful when the phone rings without warning. Carol introduced herself, said she was handling the estate of a man named Thomas Ware, and paused. Margaret said, "I don't know that name." Carol said, "I believe he knew your husband." A silence. Margaret said, "What kind of attorney are you?" Carol explained. She told her what she had found, the payments, the 15 years, the total, without speculation, without editorializing. A longer silence. Margaret said, "I thought it was a program. A workers' compensation extension, or something, through the state. When David was injured, we were told there might be supplemental assistance depending on his case classification. I applied for everything I could find. After a while the money just came every month and I stopped trying to trace exactly where it was from. I had a lot of other things to manage." She paused. David couldn't work anymore. His mobility improved over time but never enough to go back to what he had done. He retrained, took a bookkeeping course, found some part-time work. But it took years. Our daughter was in elementary school. I was working full-time. There was a period of about 3 years where we were a few decisions away from losing the house. The payments were the margin. They were the difference between keeping it and not. Carol asked if David had known where the money was coming from. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't know what David knew. He had his own way of carrying things." Carol drove to Greensboro on a Saturday. She brought the bank records, the OSHA report, the 2007 news article, and the timeline she had assembled over 3 weeks. She had not been asked to make the trip. It was not part of her job, but she had spent too long living with this story to let it close without someone explaining it properly, and she felt, without being entirely able to justify it, that Margaret Henley deserved to hear the full account from someone who had taken the time to understand it. Margaret opened the door. They sat at the kitchen table. Margaret had made coffee while Carol was still parking. Carol laid out everything. The checklist, the accident, the 2 years of silence, the first payment in September 2009, 212 transfers over 15 years. She said the payments had continued through every change in Thomas's life, and that as far as she could determine, he had told no one. Margaret listened. She didn't cry. She sat with her hands around the coffee cup and absorbed the information with the focused attention of someone who has been waiting to understand something without knowing what they were waiting for. When Carol finished, Margaret stood and left the room without saying anything. She came back a moment later holding a plain white envelope. She placed it on the table between them. She said, "David wrote this 3 weeks before he died. He gave it to our daughter Claire with instructions to give it to me if anything happened. He had been convinced for years that someone had been helping us. He couldn't work out who. He had tried." She paused. "He wanted whoever it was to know some things." She pushed the envelope toward Carol. The letter was in a hand that had clearly been difficult to write, compressed on one side, slightly uneven, the handwriting of a man working against limited mobility. It said, "I don't know your name. I have tried to find it. I want you to know that whatever you have been carrying, you can set it down. What happened was not only yours. I made choices too. We both did. Thank you for the house. Thank you for Claire's education. Thank you for not disappearing." Carol read it twice. She folded it carefully and placed it back on the table. Thomas Ware's estate was closed 4 months later. His son received the house, the retirement accounts, and the life insurance payout. There was nothing remaining to transfer to Margaret Henley. The payments had stopped when Thomas died, and the account held only enough to cover final costs. Carol told the son what she had found. He did not ask for details. He said, "Was it legal?" Carol told him it was. He nodded and didn't speak for a moment. Then, he wasn't a man who talked about things. Margaret's daughter Claire was 31 by then, working in Charlotte. Her mother had told her about Thomas Ware and the payments and the letter David had written. Claire had found the OSHA report on her own and sat with it for a long time. She told her mother she didn't know how to feel, whether 15 years of anonymous payments was accountability or a way of avoiding it. Whether her father's forgiveness was something Thomas had earned or something he had quietly borrowed without permission. Margaret thought about it. She said, "Your father wrote that letter because he decided to. Nobody made him. He decided the weight wasn't worth carrying anymore." She paused. "I think Thomas Ware made the same decision. He just made it 15 years earlier. And then he made it again, every single month after that." Carol heard none of that directly. She heard it from Margaret, in a phone call 6 months after the estate closed. A call Margaret made for no particular reason, just to say that things were all right, and that she had finally taken down the spreadsheet she had kept for 12 years trying to work out where the money was coming from. She said it felt strange to stop looking. Carol said she understood. She had filed the estate summary the week following her conversation with the son. In the notes she wrote only what was documentable: recurring external transfers, purpose unconfirmed, terminated upon death. It was accurate. It was also, she thought, the emptiest possible description of what she had found. # story notes. Fictional. All names, locations, and identifying details are invented. The scenario draws on general knowledge of workers' compensation processes, OSHA reporting standards, and estate administration procedures.